Hey everyone, this is Necromancer 1040 here. So I got another deck profile for you all. I know it's been a while since I last uploaded a deck profile, so yeah, this is long overdue. So it's like my previous Dragoonity deck profile. This one's going to be very similar to that in the sense that I'm going to revisit one of my kind of old decks that I've made like a few years back and just kind of uh, see what my thought process was on this particular build that I had. So this is by no means a very competitive build or even like a very serious build. This is just a deck that I kind of put down for a while, and I was building it for a little bit, and then I just kind of set it down and kind of forgot about it. But let's get into it. All right. So we're going to start off with 3 Alistar the Invokers. So it's pretty common. Alistar's getting, Invoke cards in general are pretty, they're getting a lot of hype now. So basically, if you don't know what he does, you get to add like an invocation card from your deck to your hand. And you can also send this card to target one fusion monster you control, and it just gains like 1,000 attack and defense. So overall, you can use it as a hand trap, or you can use it to search something. It has multiple utility, and it's 1,000 attack, and it has a pretty okay defense. It's 1,800. So, and he's a spellcaster, which is kind of the point of this deck. So 3 Alistar the Invoker, so you can search your stuff. And I almost forgot about this card. Yeah, this is kind of like the unique thing about revisiting this deck. Black Fang Magician. You'll see why I have Black Fang Magician in here, but I guess you can kind of see already. It's basically to bring something back from the graveyard, one dark spellcaster type monster from the graveyard, and you can use it to pendulum summon with White Fang Magician as well. So I remember when I was using White Fang Magician in tandem with a Black Fang Magician, or White Wing Magician, I mean. When I was using it with Black Fang Magician, I never used her effects all too much. Yeah, you can kind of use it to basically negate an effect and destroy something, or if you pendulum summon, it banishes stuff. But mainly I used her for her tuner effect, or not really an effect, but because she's a tuner, you'll kind of see why I use her for that application. There's kind of some neat and interesting synchro summons in this deck. So with that, yeah, that's why I use this engine. It also helps, this engine here, it does help get quite a few cards out of your hand that you otherwise would have kind of a problem getting out. So that's kind of like the purpose of the pendulum cards. I also use Temperance of Prophecy, so this is where it gets kind of interesting. The main reason for Temperance of Prophecy is if you activate a spellbook card, basically this turn before you summoned it, you can tribute it, and then you can summon a level 5 or higher light or dark spellcaster type monster. And there are a few, I'm pretty sure you already know what I'm trying to get out in this deck if you have any idea what prophecies do. But Temperance of Prophecy is kind of like your gateway to the main kind of monsters, boss monsters you want on the board. And he's a level 3, so he's kind of weird, but he can allow for interesting synchro summons, as you'll see later on. I use 2 Spellbook Magician of Prophecy. So Spellbook Magician of Prophecy just basically allows you to search for one spellbook card, and that's basically any spellbook card in the deck. So you mainly want to search out, stuff like Spellbook of Knowledge, which we do have in this deck. And he's just your overall basic searcher of the deck. So I know you're probably wondering, why not 3? Sometimes you get 2 in your opening hand, and you kind of don't want that, and it kind of just takes up space. So 2 I found was a little more efficient for the purposes of this deck, and that's why. So yeah. And he's also good for synchro summon, so you can allow for interesting level manipulations. So this is why we use Temperance of Prophecy. So you mainly want to get out your High Priestess out from the deck, and basically, if you don't know what she does, you can reveal 3 spellbook cards from your hand and then special summon this card from your hand. But with Temperance, it's a little easier to summon her out. But also, you can banish 1 spellbook card from your graveyard, from your hand or your graveyard, and then you can target 1 card on the field and then destroy it. So this is the main reason why you want her on board as fast as you can, so you can just destroy things on your opponent's side of the board and just kind of take advantage away from your opponent. And you have a pretty decent beater on board. She's 25 attack. So with that, and that's why I used 2. 3 was kind of a little excessive, so those were the reasons why. I also use Prophecy Destroyer. This is the other target that I use for Temperance of Prophecy. I always like the artwork on that guy. Sorry. But basically, the reason why I use this guy in the deck is also for is because of the Temperance target, and he brings himself back when you banish 3 spellbook spell cards. So you can special summon him from the graveyard, and you basically have this 2500 attacker. So he's pretty decent overall. You can use him for a link summon, or you can just attack with him straight up. Overall, it allows for a great amount of versatility in the deck, and he's not as bad as people said he was. I use 1 Summoner Monk, just basically because this is a spellbook deck and we use a lot of spell cards in this deck, so that's why I use Summoner Monk. He basically summons himself out, goes into defense. You can discard 1 spell card and then summon a level 4 spellcaster type monster from your deck to the field, and it's great to basically get him first turn. But I think at the time I was experimenting with him. I wanted to see how he'd work. That's why you kind of notice the weird ratio of just 1 copy of him. But in reality, I probably would use 2 if I was like refining the deck a little more and just trying to see how competitive the deck would be. But 1 Summoner Monk for this deck that I had. So now, here's your main spellbook, Spellbook of Secrets. So, Spellbook of Secrets, you can add 1 spellbook card from your deck to your hand except Spellbook of Secrets, and you can only activate it once per turn. So this is basically the card you want to go into. You pretty much use 3 copies of this all the time. This is basically the spellbook card you're going to search off of Blue Boy, or Spellbook Magician, as he's formerly known. But basically, this is your searcher, another one of your crucial searchers of the deck. And maybe if you have 2 of them in your hand, that's why you can use a Summoner Monk. And this card's great overall. Mandatory 3 of. And this is also why I use the Pendulum engine. Pendulum Call. Basically, this is kind of pretty much one of your best starter cards. It's crazy. I remember using this deck. Most of the time when you resolve this, you'd win because you can get your Pendulum monsters out so quick, and basically you summon out all the monsters you want from your hand, and you can link off and go into your extra deck plays from it. So that's why I use 3 of them. I know it might be a little excessive, but Summoner Monk can help deal with it. And again, you can use more Summoner Monks to make this more viable. But you just discard 1 card from your hand, and you search 2 Magician Pendulum monsters from your deck, and you add them to your hand. So yeah. I use 2 invocations. So basically this allows you to special summon 1 fusion monster from your extra deck, and basically it allows you to get out an invoke fusion monster by using by banishing monsters from your field and or either player's graveyard. So this card is really great. It allows you to bypass a lot of limitations for a lot of the invoke fusion monsters that you can't normally get out. So invocation's pretty good. And you may be wondering why I'm not using 3. It's in the side deck. It's you'll see it there, but it's kind of weird at 3. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it does work. So I think I was trying to figure that out. But as you know, I never quite did because I kind of put this deck down. But it's interesting to see where I would go from here. I probably would put it at 3 now because it's more essential. But 2 for this purpose of this deck. Spellbook of Knowledge. This is basically your draw power. You can send to the graveyard either 1 spellcaster monster you control or 1 spellbook card from your hand or face up on the field, except this card, to the grave, and you basically draw 2. it's a pot of greed for spellbooks. And so yeah, you could use 3, but 3 is kind of a little excessive. Sometimes you may not have the card you need to discard, and this kind of just sits there. So that's why I just left it at 2. But this can work at 3, but for this build, I just used 2. So Grand Spellbook Tower. This is basically the card that allows you to recycle stuff, and you also draw stuff. So it says once per turn during your standby phase, if you have spellcaster type monster on the field or in your graveyard, you can return one spellbook spell card from your graveyard to the bottom of your deck. So this shuffles things back. And then the Grand Spellbook Tower, then if you have this card on the field, you basically draw 1 card after you use that effect. So basically this card's your draw engine, and it's basically your recycle engine. And using it at 3 was a little too excessive like other cards, but it works at 2, so that's why. Spellbook of the Master. So this is kind of a crazy card, but even though it is crazy, I'm not using it at 3. So basically, if you have a spellbook, or if you have a spellcaster type monster, basically if you control it, you can reveal 1 spellbook card in your hand to target 1 spellbook normal spellbook card in your graveyard, and then except for this one, and you basically copy that target's effect. So basically, you can reuse, you could potentially use a spellbook card, spellbook card's effect twice in a row, even though it says you can only use it once per turn. This card makes that possible. So yeah, 2 Spellbook of the Masters. You can use 3, but I think it is a little excessive. So I don't know. Maybe you have a specific build that you're working on where it works, but for this purposes, that's why I have it at 2. Spellbook of Wisdom. It's a lot of versatility in the deck. You basically target 1 spellcaster type monster in the field, and it's unaffected by spells, this effect, or it's unaffected by traps. So this can afford protection to your spellcaster type monsters, and basically it allows you, it's almost like interruption, and it just allows you to keep the necessary components or monsters you need on board in order to get your extra deck plays. Also use Spellbook of Power. So this is just to boost attack strength, and also to activate Temperance of Prophecy's ability. If you just summon something and then you manage to put Spellbook Power on it, and you use it on your spellcaster type monster, and then you special summon Temperance onto the field, then you basically get Temperance's effect. And that's kind of the combo I was going with this card. So yeah, 1 Spellbook of Power. 2 is a little bit much. And I use 1 Magical Meltdown. So Magical Meltdown is mainly used to add 1 Alistar the Invoker from your deck to your hand, and also it prevents your opponent from basically negating cards that basically have you fusion summon from your deck, and it also helps stop your opponent's activation of cards that will stop you from making those effects happen, or fusion summons from happening on your side of the field. So that's the gist of it. I use 1. 2 is kind of a little bit excessive, mainly because we have other field spells, and you kind of want to use the other field spell more than this one, so you just kind of use it at 1. So that's why I just keep it at that ratio. So I basically use 1 Spellbook of Fate. If you control 1 spellcaster type monster on the field, you can banish 3 spellbook cards from your graveyard, and then you can apply this effect. You can choose one of these effects, whether it's you return 1 set spell or trap on the field into the hand, or you change one of your opponent's monsters from face-up attack to defense, or the last effect, that you banish 1 of your opponent's, or just basically 1 card on the field, but you're mainly using that against your opponent. So that's primarily the effect you want. Banishing something on the field, it deals with a lot of problematic monsters that have effects that say that they can't be targeted, and this gets around it. So this is kind of like your clutch card to kind of get around your opponent's strategy. So yeah, 1 Spellbook of Fate. Sometimes it's dead in your hand, so that's why it's at 1. I use 1 Spellbook of Eternity to return some of your banished spellbook cards into your hand, and basically I only use one because it can be a very dead card, especially early game. So you do not want to see it early game. You want to see it late game. That's when it's most live and it can do the most for you. So one copy. Now for the one-ofs, I use Scapegoat, I use Instant Fusion, I use Reasoning, I use Upstart Goblin for draw power. This is basically the summon. That's another summon from the extra deck, and this is basically to get your link combos going. And yeah, and also I use Card Destruction. So Card Destruction basically allows you to almost reset your hand if you get it your first turn around. So that's why I mainly use it. It's great. And even in later game, because you can draw a lot with this deck, it can kind of be hit or miss. But when you do draw and you activate that, you really do get Card Destruction's effect going pretty well. So yeah, that's why I use these cards. And so that pretty much wraps it up for the main deck. So now let's get on to the basically the extra deck. So I use one Alistar the Invoker of Madness. I didn't have a particular reason for using this card, but otherwise then it's an invoke card and it's a link monster, so it could help you get through your link plays. But overall, it's a great card, and I would recommend it if you're using it for any invoke build. So that's why I use it at 1. It's really powerful as well. So also Decode Talker, it's your generic. Basically your generic link monster you can use to climb up into your bigger plays. It also has a kind of decent attack points, and also you can increase its attack points potentially. But overall, it's there for link climbing, and kind of it can also be offensive too. So that's why I keep it at 1. Underclock Taker, another generic link monster. Same thing for Trigate Wizard. Yeah, basically these are the two very generic cards that I use in it. I use one Crowley, the prophecy, the first prophecy. Yeah, it's kind of weird to pronounce its name. But also, this is the part I want to get to. Nirvana High Paladin Magician. This is the main reason why I use the Pendulum Magicians in this deck, mainly to get this guy out. And basically, you can cut your opponent's life points in half. And he's a pretty nasty beater in general. He gains you so much. Advantage. It's crazy. That's why I use the pendulum cards in this deck, because this is basically the first guy I go to when I basically pendulum summon and then I synchro summon off of White Wing Magician. So that's insane. Clearwing Fast Dragon. The reason why I use Clearwing Fast Dragon is because I also use this guy. This is the instant fusion target that I normally go for. He kind of has some sick artwork. Come on, focus. Dragonus the Wicked Knight. So, yeah, this is kind of like an oldie but goodie, and also kind of an underrated card. So basically, instant fusion summon her out, and basically you synchro summon with any other monster, and then bam, you get this out. So you get Clearwing Fast Dragon affords you a negate, and it's a pretty nasty attacker. If it gets destroyed, it goes into the pendulum zone, much like Nirvana High Paladin. So you have potential scales here that you could work with, and you kind of pendulum summon off of that. So that's why I use these two cards. Odd Eyes Rebellion Dragon, just to get over stuff, over monsters that your opponent may have that are kind of problematic. So he kind of increases attack points and then swings over stuff. So that's why I use a Dark Rebellion Dragon. Invoked Elysium, of course. You use Invoked Raijin, and then you use Invoked Cositis. Basically, he can attack while in defense, so he's kind of a sneaky card to get past. And basically, with Invoked Raijin, you can, once per turn during either player's turn, you can target one face-up monster on the field and change it to face-down defense position. So this is kind of like a Book of Moon for your deck. And also Invoked Elysium. I know a lot of people don't use Invoked Elysium. So the main reason why I use Invoked Elysium is because once per turn, during either player's turn, you can target one invoked monster in your graveyard, and you can banish it, and you banish that monster along with all cards your opponent, or all monsters your opponent controls with the same attribute as the monster you banished, and you banish all those cards. So if you banish the wind type monster and your opponent has a bunch of wind type monsters on the field, you basically banish all of their wind type monsters. So this can basically clear boards very effectively. That's why I use Invoked Elysium. And lastly, I use Invoke Caligula. And basically, if a player's monster effect attempts to activate, none of that player's monster's effect can activate their effects for the rest of the turn while this card is face up on the field. Each player can attack with only one monster. So this is basically your floodgate. So Caligula is mainly meant to go in defense. You basically protect it, and you kind of like hold out the field once you established your board. And you kind of keep your opponent at bay with Caligula. And of course, I also use it in 2 Invoked Macabas, because Invoked Macabas is probably the easiest to summon out of all the fusion monsters. But basically, once per turn, when a spell, trap, or monster effect is activated, you can send the same type of card from your hand to the graveyard and then negate the activation. So that's why you want to use Invoked Macaba. It's basically your negate of the deck, and he's easy to get out with all the invoked monsters. Use a lot of light monsters in this deck. And so yeah, that pretty much wraps up the invoked engine for the fusions. This isn't so much a side deck, but these are pretty much cards you can kind of use if you want. And I use one Spellbook of Light. Well, I was using it at the time for almost like a Monster Reborn effect. And there's the other copy of Invocation. And here's Terraforming. I mean, you can switch it in. Most of the times I would switch it in. It's funny kind of remembering that. And this is your also other Pendulum Magician Pendulum card that you kind of would want to go into, that you can use as an option if you ever wanted to. So you could switch this out for any other spell card and just have more Pendulum cards to search for off of Pendulum Call. That's fine. Also, you can use this card to basically steal one of your opponent's cards from their deck. So if you know you're pretty much everyone uses an Ash Blossom, and you basically call Ash Blossom, and then you get it into your hand, and your opponent's kind of left feeling sad at the end of the day because of it. But that's why I use these cards. So these cards are more meant to be like option cards. They're not really necessary to the deck, but they're kind of interesting cards you can work with and kind of take the idea of your deck from there. But that pretty much wraps up the video. Yeah, it's kind of interesting going back down memory lane and seeing all these cards, and kind of seeing how certain strategies have changed over the years, and kind of going through my own head and saying like, hey, I kind of wouldn't use this anymore, or I would use more copies of this card, and it's interesting to see that. So yeah, that pretty much wraps it up for the video. If you want to support content like this, and definitely if you want to support more deck profiles like this, or more deck profiles in the future in general, you can help support me on Patreon. That's normally down in the description below. And yeah, with that, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all your support, and take care. All right, see you.